Thank you so much. Yep. Can I welcome to the stage Matt Cole, please? Hey, Matt, just sit underneath your thing there. Tim Kotzman, please. Hey, Tim.
Hello.
And finally, Austin Alexander.
Hello.
Wow, what a beautiful place.
Hello.
So today we've got a panel where we're going to discuss treasury management from both a public and a state nation style. I'm just looking this morning, and obviously I did a panel with the analysts from Wall Street, and I noticed how many Bitcoin have been mined up to now. I think we're at 20 million in the next few days. So it's literally 95% of all the Bitcoin that's ever going to be mined has already been mined. And when we hear all these news stories about nations wanting to buy 200,000 Bitcoin a year for the next 5 years, I'm thinking, where are they going to buy it from? Because the challenge is, there's 20 million out there. There's probably 3 to 4 million of it lost. So then you're down to sort of 15, 16 million. We know there's a guy called Michael Saylor's company Strategy. They've got like 500,000. Then you've got the ETFs have got probably the best part of another million. It's a real challenge out there. But we're going to discuss today how companies can start looking to buy Bitcoin and what the opportunities are. In terms of the first question, and I'd like to put this to Matt, corporate versus sovereign strategies. Corporations like MicroStrategy have adopted Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Nations like El Salvador have also gone down that route. We know that obviously the US are very interested with the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve to go down the same route. Talk me through some of the opportunities and the challenges that can face these types of organizations going down it.
Yeah, so you're obviously starting to see adoption at the corporate level in the United States, some bills at the state level, nations. Bitcoin's a really interesting asset on multiple levels. One, it's the first savings asset that we've had in a long time. You have the dollar, even if you're invested in treasuries, it has a negative interest rate. And so if you own dollars and you're a corporation or a country, your incentive is actually to get rid of them. So if you're a corporation, it's to do stock buybacks, it's to do capital expenditures, M&A, anything that's put that money to work so you're not just sitting on an asset that's losing purchasing power every single year. And one of the interesting things about Bitcoin is that if you think about it as adoption, it's the everyday individual bought it before the corporation. The failing company, the zombie companies are buying it before the profitable companies. And I think that's interesting because it gives power to those that had less power. And so when you think about adoption, I do think eventually, I think we're at the precipice of the United States buying Bitcoin in a major way. Frankly, way sooner than I anticipated. And I think if that were to happen, you get massive adoption really quickly. But ultimately, it's stakeholder management. Education is the most difficult thing in Bitcoin. And this community, obviously, at this conference, probably almost entirely Bitcoiners, but that's not what you face if you're a corporation and your CEO trying to convince a board, or even if you're running a nation and you're trying to convince your citizens and your stakeholders, if they're not educated, then it feels like something that they can't support. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge, and people that can educate quicker will be the winners.
If I can add on to what Matt said, it's interesting and awesome, obviously, that you had individuals adopt first, then companies, institutions, nation states. That's what you would think. But the reality is it's actually going to go individuals, some zombie companies, but the companies that are profitable, there's career risks, there's like, they don't have a need to know, as Michael Saylor would say. So it'll go individuals, zombie companies, nation states, and then the rest of the corporates. At least that's my view.
It is a wonderful thing that Satoshi put the issuance schedule so front loaded, because at least back in the day, people used to have the conversations that maybe the the issuance was too front loaded, and the mining subsidy is going to run out too quickly. But thankfully, in Satoshi's infinite wisdom, he front loaded the issuance so heavily so that all the coins could go to the counterculture radical true believers instead of the squares. And that decision by Satoshi, it's going to like kind of change the course of of human progress forever, because think about how it would be if we were only at like 25% of the coins had been issued or had been discovered so far or been released so far. We'd be looking at a world where, you know, relatively trivially to today, or at least, or without empowering all these risk-taking individuals, the nation states and the old guard would be the ones being empowered by this like wealth shift. And so I really would like to commend Mr. Satoshi for that, or Mrs. Satoshi.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that we're all here. We all believe in the Bitcoin, and the trouble is, obviously, outside of here, we're still fighting that sort of adoption. I use the analogy when I first considered buying the iPhone. I think it was the iPhone 3. My son dragged me to the iPhone shop. I think I had a Nokia basic text and phone. That was all I needed to do. But he dragged me along there, and once I got it, I realized, hey, this is great. And so I always say, at the moment, we're probably like at the iPhone 3 stage in terms of adoption, and iPhone's at the 16 stage now. So we're gradually building up towards there. And if we're ever feeling down about the volatility of Bitcoin, I always sort of like, go to a Michael Saylor video, and it perks me up for a few more days before I start feeling mad again. But Michael Saylor, obviously, he's a great advert, a great marketing tool for the Bitcoin community. And but even he had challenges. I mean, he recently went to the Microsoft board to get them to consider adopting Bitcoin. This is one of the largest companies in the world from a market capitalization. So there are challenges out there that we find. In terms of risks and rewards, if we're sort of like starting to look at companies adopting Bitcoin on the balance sheet, sort of what sort of percentage would you be sort of like saying in terms of 1-5%, even more than that? What do you think on that, Matt?
Yeah, so every company should have a different idea in how to implement a Bitcoin corporate strategy. And so there's zombie companies. And so for zombie companies, frankly, they shouldn't exist. And if you're a zombie company, you should go all in, like MicroStrategy or Strategy, to acquire the maximum amount of Bitcoin, shut down unprofitable operations. That's what we laid out when we sent a letter to GameStop last month, laying out a framework. We knew that they were already considering buying Bitcoin, but if you think about an Overton window for a company like that their brick and mortar stores have no future, the more they move into acquiring a massive amount of Bitcoin, the better their long-term prospects are going to be for their company. For a company like Microsoft, so 99% of investors voted against this proposal for them to consider putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Strive was one of the 1% that voted yes. What's the argument for Microsoft? Well, they actually have a real operating business. They're profitable. They have a pretty strong future. But if you think about this world of exponential AI innovation, they're obviously heavy investors in that. But even though they're heavy investors in that with OpenAI, their business moat is at risk, at least in the way it is today. And that's true for almost every single tech company out there. And so if you think about a company, this is not Bitcoin yet, but if you think about Bitcoin argument yet, if you think about a company that's business mode is at substantial risk into a period of exponential innovation, you should have a larger balance sheet, more capital on your balance sheet. That's not about Bitcoin yet. So that's every tech company. They should have a larger balance sheet. And then we say, well, what should the balance sheet hold? There's only one savings asset in the world right now, and it's Bitcoin. And so almost every single tech company should acquire a war chest of Bitcoin to hedge themselves for the future, even if they have a great operating business today like Microsoft. But to Tim's point, most of them are going to be complacent about their own moat, and they're going to be unlikely to go in that direction. But those that do, I think, are positioning themselves in a much stronger way than those that don't for the long run future.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about incentives because if you think about GameStop and all of the story that many of us know, uh, the retail to coming in, the excitement. Well, what was the incentive? The incentive was to sell and try to make money and move on to the next trade. Well, what happens with GameStop now when they put Bitcoin on the balance sheet? It becomes this armor for the corporations that are putting it on the balance sheet. It's becoming you're adding, you're building, you're contributing, you're making the network stronger. And so the more corporations that adopt, I mean, it's just going to literally raise all ships. Arguably, MicroStrategy will be the big ship.
Yeah, Austin. I mean, how early are we in this in sort of like treasury management with companies across the US, and how can we sort of improve that speed of adoption?
Well, I think ultimately Bitcoin is going to become like the reserve asset of all human economic activity. So from that lens, which I'm personally I'm convinced of it. So from that lens, we're incredibly early because every single company in the world is going to eventually, every single notable company at the very least is going to every single public company. They're all going to be Bitcoin treasury companies. It's inevitable. They have to if they want to exist. So I'd say incredibly early, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So maybe just one quick point on it. I agree. We're incredibly early. I don't think there will be an infinite amount of time to acquire a war chest of Bitcoin. That is different than owning Bitcoin out of necessity. Where if you think about the S&P 500, the 500th company that puts Bitcoin on in their treasury is doing so out of desperation.
Yeah. And you can think of the analogy of like from individuals' perspective. If you were set on acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible in 2010, 2011, you didn't need to be a multimillionaire to make quite a meaningful impact and change the course of your life. If you were a fry cook at Burger King and you were set to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible in 2010 or 2011, yeah, and you were able to hold it, which is a big if. You're probably doing very, very, very well right now. So I think that it's a similar analogy.
In terms of longer term horizon,
Sorry, real quick. I think it's a really important point for any corporate treasurer, founder, CEO, CFO that's listening to this. How much time do you think they have to mobilize, educate themselves, and actually get a war chest?
Yeah. So I think we're talking about a period of 1 to 2 years where you could announce being a Bitcoin treasury company, and the financial markets will allow you to issue more shares through the ATM, to do convertible debt notes, other types of securities. It's not always in our country that any company can acquire a bunch of capital. Like, forget Bitcoin for a second. If you just are a struggling company or you're concerned and you want to raise a bunch of capital for your treasury, that's not infinite capital. There's times that that's not possible. It's possible today, and so I do think we're at a period of a couple of years, probably max, before the ability to acquire a war chest is probably gone.
do we feel comfortable when you look at the public companies that hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet? We have obviously Strategy with in excess of 500,000 coins now. The next 4 or 5 are actually the Bitcoin mining companies who've started to re-hodl this last 18 months, literally hodl everything and use other means of capital to pay their operating and their capital growth. Policy. Do we feel that gap? I think Marathon have got 46,000 and they're in second place. Is there a war chest too big for maybe one company, or how do we feel on that?
I don't think the war chest's too big. I mean, if it's too big, then they can always donate it. Correct? Yeah. No, it's likely that MicroStrategy is likely going to be the most well capitalized company on earth, and what they do with that in the future remains to be seen. But uh, I mean, there's an argument to be made that maybe it's too big from like the holistic health of the Bitcoin economy or whatever. I'm not convinced of that, but I could see an argument made for that. But from the I don't think there's a point where it's too big for the stakeholders of the company or of any company or any individual or any nation state. I mean, the race is on. Satoshi fired the starter pistol. Most people didn't realize that the race was on. Most people still don't realize that the race is on. But if we have this shift and Bitcoin becomes the reserve asset for economic activity, then the race is well on. And those that realize today, even still, the fry cook at Burger King who realizes today that the race is on and goes all in, there's still tremendous upside, and there always will be, because if we just keep shifting towards the point where that is like the default state where people they're the reason why they are at work, why they form these companies, what is becomes to acquire money. They want the money, why? For purchasing power, and Bitcoin will be that money. So the race is on, and it's never going to end.
The race is certainly on. It's interesting if you just follow. I mean, we're all on a journey. If you follow Michael Saylor's journey, I mean, he first tweeted that Bitcoin was going to go the way of online gambling. Then, things changed in 2020. Then he was opportunistic, or kind of like, hey, we need to do something different. Then it went to opportunistic, and now it's, very opportunistic, right? We don't have to go through the word salad of adjectives, but um, a few years ago, you listen to an interview and he says, I would be up at night, like someone's going to figure this out and I need to buy as much as I can. And now, just my opinion, you see the bewilderment in his eyes. He can't, like, it's amazing that more people are not doing this. And he's like, well, I'm just going to keep going because this is like, why would I not? I mean, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and maybe just I agree with everything that was said, but a word of caution would be, most people don't understand MicroStrategy. In my view, they're not even close to over levered. No one knows how they break, but everybody's afraid that they're going to break because of the leverage that they've intelligently deployed. In my view, but I do think in a race to acquire war chests of Bitcoin, I do think that there will be companies that take too much risk, that put on too much debt, and probably one or multiple that at some point probably do fail because of taking too much risk. I think that's natural in any race, and the great thing about Bitcoin is that there's no bailouts in Bitcoin, so it'll be fine. But it's not just acquire a war chest by any means necessary and take on too much leverage. Like, if you follow what MicroStrategy's done, it is very, very difficult to break their structure. But as more and more companies do that, I think some will probably take a little bit more risk, and that maybe works out, and for some maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, I can relate to that, Matt. I mean, we saw I think it was the end of 2021, 2022, at the end of the last bull cycle, we saw some mining companies actually go out there and buying Bitcoin to really build their hodl even further, because, there was a belief that 69,000 wasn't going to be the end of that period. I think some of the big analysts on social media were suggesting 100,000, and it never happened. And we saw 2022, the Bitcoin price dropped. And for miners, that just didn't impact the value on their balance sheet, but it also impacted the value of their machines on the balance sheet. And they'd taken out debt to buy this Bitcoin, and then it spiraled. And a lot of these miners now struggled, and some of them literally gone out of business since then. So I do see that. We talk about, we all understand the long-term aspirations of Bitcoin. We see in the future. And I know, Tim, we were in New York a couple of weeks ago listening to the Bitcoin Investor Week, all these top speakers there talking about their guide prices for Bitcoin. And I felt really comfortable coming out of that session, because I'm thinking, that's really perked me up a bit now. I've still got I don't sell my Bitcoin, but it's perked me up where we're going to see the future. But we're sort of still trying to explain to companies about the short-term volatility, and how do we sort of get that messaging across write to companies that are interested, or even to states that are going through this process now of trying to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve at the state level?
Yeah, I mean, I think doing the study of what's been successful and strategy is the poster child. I mean, when they're selling additional shares and then immediately, literally the same day, in a lot of cases, turning around and just buying Bitcoin, that's a word called accretive, right? It's just accretive. There's no dilution. There is technically, but it's accretive dilution, right? That's the new favorite phrase that we like to use. And it's it's if you look at the structure, you look at the convertible debt, it's literally on a corporate level what individuals hopefully are doing, which is you're buying as much Bitcoin as you can that you can hold for at least 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's it. That's the whole playbook. The end.
And of course, alluding to what Matt was saying earlier, there have been many individuals who, they got into Bitcoin 2010, 2011, and they have no Bitcoin today. They have nothing because they blew themselves out because they took irresponsible leverage. I worked for many years at a very big exchange at Kraken, and I saw many people get completely blown out. And in hindsight, of course, they're like, "Why would I do this? Why would I do this?" But the fever takes over, and so there are going to be many. There'll probably be nation states that get blown out because they do it wrong. They lever up incorrectly, and so I don't think we're not going to see an end to that anytime ever.
Yeah.
No, I mean, greed is powerful, and there is a extremely compelling case to acquire the maximum amount of Bitcoin you can in the shortest time as possible. That's what Michael Saylor's doing extremely, extremely effectively. But in any time where you have an opportunity like that, if you did not see a corporation or a nation blow up in this gold rush, I would say it would be shocking because, what to your point, Austin, is how many people do you know, I mean, that have blown themselves out in Bitcoin or could not handle the short-term volatility? And part of the ability to handle the short-term volatility is being convicted in the asset. If you haven't done the work, then you can't handle the volatility. But if you think as an institutional investor, institutions will typically, when they're buying more risky assets, they buy it in private equity vehicles. And the benefit for that to them is that they don't see what the price is every day. They see a new price every 3 months, right? But those assets, if you invest in a startup, and if you were actually trying to mark the value of a startup and looking at its customer acquisition and growth metrics on a daily basis, that startup would be more volatile than Bitcoin is. And people will be scared. But instead, you actually see institutions talk about how great private equity and venture investing is because of its stable values. Well, those stable values are false. And so Bitcoin's liquidity, its 24/7 liquidity, is actually a blessing. It's the most liquid asset, but that liquidity shows volatility. And if you ever have an asset that can go up a lot and it has no volatility, that's called a Ponzi. And so the fact that Bitcoin has volatility, I think, just shows the opportunity over time. And zoom out just a bit.
Yeah, and I've heard some people say, I think somebody was saying at that I was there as well in the Bitcoin Investor Week that they thought that the volatility of Bitcoin was going to dampen down, but it's unique, it's completely novel, and the world does not know the price, the real value, the real price of Bitcoin. I mean, none of us even. You might think it's way higher than it is today. I think it is, but I don't know what the value of the true value of Bitcoin is. And there's a lot of capital in the world, a lot, and a lot of people. And the vast majority of those people are not participating in the price discovery of Bitcoin today. So as that capital and those people join the race, or, understand that the race is on and they join, perhaps the volatility increases. I think that's quite possible too. So I don't think it's going away anytime soon. It's going to be decades of volatility, I believe.
In terms of how we get that messaging across to companies, even to like individual investors, what strategy would you use to to get a company to focus on when they're dealing with like shareholders, explaining the process? Is there anything that sort of like, that would help them to address this issue?
Do a lot of work to understand Bitcoin. Is really the simple answer. And if you don't want to do that work, so on as an example, Strive is a wealth management business. So we have clients that entrust us to help them save for their future, their family's future. Many of them don't know Bitcoin. We actually think that Bitcoin belongs as a core allocation. Well, how do you incorporate an asset that we have extreme conviction on that belongs in the portfolios of every person? You have to start almost artificially small. Because if it's artificially small, so like for us, like 3 to 5% of someone's portfolio, well, 3 to 5% of your portfolio has a bunch of volatility in it. For the whole portfolio, that's not a lot of volatility. And so this kind of gets back, I think one of your first questions was, what percentage should be in Bitcoin? Well, I think it should be a high percentage, but only if there's an understanding and an ability to handle that volatility. And when there's not, then you pare it back, not because that's the optimal amount to hold, but it's like the maximum amount that they can handle.
Yeah, I think until you study Bitcoin and you can appreciate, not just understand, but appreciate the volatility of the price, right? That there's volatility. It's going to be tough to go further. And that's why with the MSTR True North crew, we really like talking about a lot of the nuances. But even if you just take MNAV, everybody is going to be 2x, 3x, 30x MNAV. Well, it's going to be volatile. It's going to breathe. And until you really get into wanting to take an interest in learning about it, it's going to be tough to really put your arms around it and want it to have it in your portfolio, whether you're an individual or a company.
I think the only way that it's going to work for the vast majority of companies is just to continue to see the continued success and continued price appreciation of Bitcoin. Um, you know, a lot of eventually everyone will capitulate. Eventually, at some point, the people will dig their heels in, and as they continue to get their relative purchasing power smashed, eventually they will have to capitulate. And you can try to create a strategy of communication strategy, or a consulting company, or I don't know, a million different things. But the only thing that is really going to drive it home for probably 99% is just to see the price keep going up.
The race is on. Most people just don't know that they're in a race. I don't know why they call it the human race, because most people aren't even walking, but eventually everyone will come along.
Yeah, oh, cool. In terms of companies adopting a treasury management for Bitcoin, are there any sort of like hedging techniques that they could maybe incorporate? And are these types of techniques only available to those with maybe the deeper pockets, or are things that even the smaller companies could do to sort of manage expectation?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can hedge Bitcoin. I think the question is, do you want to hedge Bitcoin? But I think the rise of structured products around Bitcoin is going to be massive. And if you think about just structured products as a category for investing in the world, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry of slicing and different things to give different risk exposure. So there's ways that you can take Bitcoin and provide downside protection. There's multiple different ways already, but structured products is just one of them. For certain individuals or corporations, that might make sense. Potentially that could make sense for Bitcoin miners, where that to the downside of Bitcoin, their operating business has substantial leverage to the downside. Well, maybe in that scenario, you need to give up some upside of your Bitcoin to have some of that downside protection. Maybe. For other companies, no, it's just own the Bitcoin, or even leverage the Bitcoin in different ways to benefit even more. Every company's journey will be unique. I think for most companies that are at a place where they could think about buying Bitcoin, I think they're large enough to hedge it.
Yeah. Well, it's easier for a smaller portfolio. It's easier to hedge. I mean, how do you hedge 500,000 Bitcoin? How would MicroStrategies hedge that? They wouldn't want to. They shouldn't want to, probably, because with hedging, obviously, you reduce the upside. So maybe in lieu of that, maybe some of the smaller companies, they might start kind of how Metaplanet's doing, trying to figure out some yield generation strategies in lieu of hedging. But no matter what, any of these things, hedging or yield or whatever, it's always going to come with additional risk. And the counter, we've seen so many examples over and over and over and over, including very recently of just how crazy high the counterparty risk of giving someone else your Bitcoin is. And I think that the price of that counterparty risk is probably a lot higher than a lot of companies, a lot of people think. But yeah, I don't know. You don't want to hedge Bitcoin, I don't think, really.
When I set up the platform with my co-founder Bryce about 15 months ago, I tried to look at the right bank to fit my needs. And dealing with North America, I live in the UK, and obviously currency transactions. I went to the most popular bank that could do that, and I filled all the applications in, and I got my account number. And 2 days later, they closed my account without reason. And all I put on there, I was doing education in the Bitcoin mining space as my sort of topic. This is in the United Kingdom. We're supposed to be like towards the forefront of technology, but countries around the world are still not seeing the same as maybe we're seeing in the US. What do you feel is the impact of, say, the IMF's thoughts on Bitcoin, or other countries or other groups of countries like Europe? We've seen, the head of the European Union say that they really don't want any of the European states to adopt Bitcoin. And straight away, we had one of the European countries come out and saying we're definitely going to adopt it. But how do you feel these sort of remarks in the news can affect what we're trying to hopefully achieve globally?
Well, it's a speed bump at best. Of course, they're going to come out and say that, because for the IMF and these analogous institutions, it's a direct threat on their grip on power. And when you control the money, that's real power, serious power. So of course it's going to happen. But I say a personal story. I was unbanked for like almost 3 years. I wasn't trying. There was a nice chunk there where literally all day, every day, my full-time job was trying to get a bank account. I spent like 3 months doing nothing but trying to get a bank account many years ago. And in hindsight, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because I had to get even more reliant on Bitcoin for my life because they wouldn't bank me. And so the upside was wonderful. It was like, I don't know what my life would be like if that hadn't happened, but it probably wouldn't be as nice as it is now. It's very nice that they unbanked me. So, maybe that's a similar thing will play out, but it's inevitable. It's just a speed bump. So, they can try to, stand on the beach and try to push the waves away, but, they're going to get smashed eventually.
So Europe, from a corporate perspective and from a prosperities perspective, has just been massive losers. For the last 40 years, they've underperformed American equities by 2,000%, because they've been about control over freedom, stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. It's not by chance that if you look at the largest companies in the globe, they're not in Europe. They're much more likely to be in America. So I think that the nice thing about Bitcoin is Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin does not need the strategic Bitcoin reserve in America to win. America is much stronger if it acquires a war chest of Bitcoin to win. And so ultimately, I think the IMF, Europe, continues to step on its own 2 feet. They continue to try to constrain or block Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to go around them. And like they've lost in the corporate fight versus American corporations, they're going to lose in the monetary fight as well. Maybe you should move to America.
Maybe. I mean, we might be behind a little bit in the UK, but we probably still produce the best music out there. I'm thinking Beatles, the Stones, Floyd.
You love it.
You're really bringing it back. They're British.
You punch above your weight in music for sure.
What have they done for us
Absolutely, we always
lately?
punch above our weight. That's a true fact.
Well, the euro's trash.
We're not in the euro.
Absolute disaster. I'm not talking about the pound is trash too, but let's talk about the euro. The euro's trash. You really want to hold the euro over Bitcoin? You really think that what can they do to slow the growth of Bitcoin and stabilize the euro versus Bitcoin? What can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 5 minutes left. I just want to talk on one more question. We've talked about why. I'd like to throw the question now as to how these companies are going to actually physically implement a treasury management strategy in their companies, and what are the sort of like challenges they're going to face doing that from physically from physically incorporating it.
Yeah, probably the number one risk right now in the Bitcoin treasury space is the consolidation of custodians. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in kind of corporate custody and nation state custody. I really like this company Casa. They put out the first kind of product for nation state Bitcoin self custody, and probably what will end up happening is that at least the relevant forward thinking countries are going to kind of have rules around custody, that the custody must be domestic, and they'll try to they're gonna it's a very difficult thing to understand, Bitcoin custody. It's wholly unique. There's nothing ever that's been like this, that you custody like this. And so even amongst like very sophisticated Bitcoiners, individuals, there's a lot of debate and a lot of stress and around custody and third parties versus self custody, and the structure, the process, these things like that. So I think there's gonna be a lot of innovation towards that, and there probably will be a lot of um, moves towards like corporate self custody eventually. I don't know in what timeline, but eventually, and probably as um, there's more sophistication and understanding and a wider understanding amongst the decision makers and the leadership and also the shareholders. I believe at least in some parts there'll be a kind of a demand for self custody and to de-risk from the centralized custodians. And there might even be, as more and more and more companies adopt these strategies, the relative value of the companies, or the MNAV might begin to reflect how the market feels about um, the different self custody strategies and the different custodians and their relative kind of security. But I think that might be a little ways away.
Yeah, everything that was just said reminds me of when we were in DC at the Bitcoin Policy Institute Forum. There was a panel with Mike Belshi from BitGo and a couple other people, and the one question was, should nation states use a custodian? Should they do self-custody? And they said, well, the short answer is they should maybe start with a third-party custody provider, but definitely consider developing a team of people to do a custody on their own, self-custody. So I think it's, I'm reminded of an interview I did with a public executive chairman, and he said, we're very happy with our current custodians, but we're also very, very excited for the banks to come in. I mean, there's just, whether you want to call it too big to fail, there's something about JP Morgan that makes people feel comfortable. And then for others, it's right, they want to look at some sort of multi-institution custody. So, I mean, we could talk for days about just the custody part of it.
Yeah. Before we finish now, I'd just like to get my excellent panel here just to tell you how what they do and how you can get in touch with them if you need further advice. I'm certainly was out of my comfort zone a couple of weeks ago in this particular space. Anything mining orientated, I'm usually okay, but treasury management was something I hadn't used. I mean, we had a podcast literally last week with Fortress Global Limited, and they're a treasury management company out there that deliver what we've been trying to explain here. So a big up to them. But if you can explain what you do and how people can get in touch if they need more questions before we finish, so people can make that aware from.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Strive. You can find me on Twitter at Cole Macro. Our company Twitter handle is Strive Funds, or at strive.com. And if anyone has questions, I'm like this, but I think most people in the Bitcoin community are like this. Reach out. People are more than happy to help. I think this is an industry where, a rising tide really lifts all boats. So happy to help if anyone wants to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Thanks for the invite. And yeah, you can find me mostly on X at Tim Kotzman. I have wear an orange tie and do the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast, so that's a lot of fun. Covering all the executives and analyst part of it. I'm a part of the MSTR True North live streams we do every Wednesday. We really dive deep on the MicroStrategy stock in particular. A lot going on there, and yeah, I think we need more and more people in the Bitcoin space to provide these solutions, right? I work a lot with OnRamp with their custody solution. I work with Acropolis with their outsourced Bitcoin Treasury solution. But I literally said to someone within the past week, I said, if there's another company out there that does that, I don't know who they are. Now, since then, I think there's a few others, but I think that's how early we are. We're like, well, I want to do this, but I want to outsource it. Where do I go? And you're like, I can't think of more than a few. So I think this is exciting, and I would encourage everyone to, if there's something that you can contribute, whether part-time or full-time to the community, there's just a massive opportunity, not just from a learning and potentially investment standpoint, but from a career standpoint.
I'm working with 10x Capital. The firm has over 1,000 investments, many exits, a very large treasury management division. I kind of advise them on Bitcoin thing. You can find me on Twitter at BTC is money, and please write me a message so we can talk. It'd be wonderful.
Awesome. I'm Anthony Power. I'm the CEO of Power Man and Glances. And I'd just like to, if you can show your appreciation to the panel today. I've learned a lot today. I hope you've learned a lot today too. Thank you.